Have you ever wondered what it would be like to run across Christians who took Jesus seriously? I mean, Christians who embrace those red letters of the Bible, those words of Jesus, those hard words, those words about loving your enemies, of giving your money away to the poor, of turning the other cheek, of overcoming evil with good. All of those red letters of the Bible. That's what this program's about. You're going to be meeting young people who are doing that. People who have taken Jesus at his word, who are living out the Sermon on the Mount in this day and age. You're about to meet a person who will change your life. Welcome once again to Red Letter Christianity. That's what this program's about. It's a program that emphasizes the red letters of the Bible, the words of Jesus. You can argue about a lot of things, but Jesus is exceptionally clear in the Sermon on the Mount, what he calls us to do and be, and that's what this program's about. My co-host is Shane Claiborne. When Mark Lowry's not around, Shane will be here doing the show with me, and today Shane and I will be interviewing Alexie once again. Alexie Torres Fleming.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
It seems like everywhere I've been going, I just am following her tracks because she's preaching a message that's really resonating with the hearts of all kinds of people, and it's a beautiful message.
What kind of message do you get from her?
Well, what I love about Alexie is her story is really different from mine, but it's still inspired by Jesus, and it's inspired by folks like St. Francis and others. But Alexie actually came from the neighborhood that's suffering. I'm a relocator. You know,
Yeah.
I moved my life there, but I think that what I get so moved by is the fact that she could have left, but didn't. She went back and stayed, and she continues to work there.
You know, you went to Eastern where I teach, and I remember a student coming in to see me just before her graduation saying, I got a job in the Abington School District. This is a very wealthy school district on the outskirts of Philadelphia. This particular young woman had come from West Philadelphia, my old neighborhood, a African-American Hispanic neighborhood, which is really run down, beaten up, poor housing, and she had risen, see, and she had gone to school, and she had gotten this job out in the Abington School District. And she came in and said, "Oh, I'm so thrilled. There were 300 applicants for this one teaching job, and they gave it to me." And I looked at her and I said, "What a waste." And she said, "What do you mean, what a waste?" I said, "You're telling me that if you hadn't taken this job, that there were 299 other qualified people that would have stepped in and taken it. And the school system of Philadelphia was 600 teachers short this year. Why would you go and spend your life in a wealthy neighborhood where you're not needed when you can go back to your old neighborhood and do something that is desperately needed because boys and girls there don't have the kind of teachers that they need, and you're a good teacher." To her credit, I got her under conviction. She turned down the job and went and taught in West Philadelphia. She's still there.
Man, I love that story. I've loved that story for 10 years.
Yeah.
I still love that story. But the real question is not, am I going to be a doctor or a lawyer or teacher, but what kind of doctor or lawyer or teacher am I going to be? Because all of us are called to take the gifts that we have and connect them to the suffering of the world. And for some of us, that means relocating. For other people, it means going back to the neighborhood we came from. But I think that's the real invitation for all of us, is to figure out what is the role I get to play in God's miracle and of healing the world.
One of the Eastern grads that we're probably going to have on this show one of these days is Brian Stevenson. You know him, don't you?
Yeah.
Guy graduated from Eastern, went on to Harvard Law School, could have been making $500,000 a year on Wall Street as a Wall Street lawyer, goes down to Montgomery, Alabama to defend people on death row. And his argument is, how can you believe in capital punishment when Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy"? But even if you did, you couldn't believe in it in America, where there's two kinds of justice, one for rich people and one for poor people, because the poor have no one really good to speak for them for the day in court. And then he said, except in Montgomery, Alabama, where I speak for the poor. Yeah.
And as one who's needed a good lawyer from time to time,
Yeah.
I'm thankful for some
We're
kingdom
going to
lawyers.
interview Alexie.
That's right.
Once again, she was on an earlier show, but she's got more to say, and we've got more to ask her. She is an incredible person. The last time we had her here, she had Mark Lowry and me reduced to tears, not because she was trying to be sentimental, but just the authenticity of her life so moved us. So stay with us, people. We'll be right back with Alexie on camera.
As I've been traveling all over the country, I feel like I've been riding the wave of Alexie. And we've met in some wild places. We've been out in the desert. We've been in these big conferences. And now here we are on some stage with Tony. And
stalking you.
But I love it because we have a really different background growing up. But the vision that we've seen for the kingdom is really similar because it's rooted in Jesus. It's rooted in the vision of the kingdom of God coming on earth. And I wonder, though, what kind of response you get from folks. Because one of my friends in my neighborhood, he said, when you move into a neighborhood like Kensington, everybody thinks you're a hero. When I don't leave the neighborhood I grew up in, Kensington, I'm a failure. And I wonder how that's, worked itself out for you. Have you had open arms from your family and from folks, or has it been tricky at times?
Yeah, how's your family reacted to the fact that you give up this great career? Because I'm sure they had the American dream in their mind for you, and suddenly you're saying, I've got another dream other than the American dream.
Yeah, I think at first, I think there was worry and concern. I think, my parents have no real understanding of what I do, but they love me, and they, when they talk about me, they talk about the work that I do for others and the poor, and I think ultimately that's what we want for our children. I'm a mom, and ultimately I hope that I can look at my child's life and see that they've made the choices, not necessarily the same ones I have, but ones where they choose to love others and serve others, and ultimately that was my parents' message to me.
In the Bronx, you've put together a kind of a movement of young men and women, and older men and women too. It's not just young people.
That's right.
Called Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more about this organization that you've been working with in the South Bronx, and the incredible young people who have not left the community but are there trying to change their community into what God wants it to be.
Yeah, I grew up at a time where youth services in this country, was really about taking care of kids at risk and, doing basketball and arts and crafts after school, keeping them out of trouble. I grew up at a time where that's what really church really did with young people, right? CYO, and you did some basketball, you did the church, you did theater, tutoring, after school stuff, and that was sort of the best that we could think of for young people. And it occurred to me one day that maybe, that the scripture that says, the stone that the builders rejected had become the cornerstone. And I know that talks about Jesus, but in my heart I also thought, maybe that talks about the young people of this country, and I think, Shane, that's why, you and I wind up in a lot of the same places, and I love to
Because you're both rejects, or what?
Maybe because we're the stones the builder rejected, but I think also because young people want to believe or know that there's something, they're called to something greater than perhaps what the church has challenged them to. That, whether it's a life of intentional simplicity, or going back to community, going to places, the dark places of this country, and realizing that they're really some of the most beautiful and light places of this country, right? That I think that's what's attractive to young people. And so the ministry really was about that. Let's shift on its head all the ways we think about young people in this country. What if we didn't teach them that it went like this, right? And that it was all about getting away from the masses and climbing that ladder so that they could be the individual success story. And what if we could do it like Jesus did, and turn that on its head and say, well, what if we went from being that individual star and success story into community, into other, and maybe there we would find our salvation, maybe there we would find God. And that's what Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice is. And so if we believe that we find God in each other and in that collective experience, then that has to change the way we do ministry. And so ministry has to be outside. in the streets, on the corners, with those least likely, the unchurched, you know, the ones that don't look like church, don't want to come to church, don't want to know about God, but that deeply, deeply love each other and love their community. And yeah, so that's what we teach.
Exactly what Jesus was about. Jesus could have straightened out the whole world himself. Jesus has the power to do that. But instead, he wanted to empower the people.
Exactly.
He wanted to work through people, not for any other reason than by empowering people, it would transform them.
Yes.
And so in a real sense, what I heard you saying, if I got you right, instead of asking what the rich, privileged, white establishment of which I'm a part can do for these unfortunate people in the Bronx, what can the people in the Bronx do for themselves? And in doing for themselves and changing their community, their dignity will be enhanced, their sense of self-worth will be increased, and their vision of themselves as children of God will become very real.
Absolutely.
You know, and I know you don't just kind of arrive at this kind of these ideas, and we have people that we've looked up to and that have poured into us. I mean, one of my spiritual dads is right over here, and I've heard you talk about your dad, and I know my mom has been one of my closest friends through all of my journey, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about your father and even some of the other folks that were inspirations for you.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, I think it's true, and I think there's something that is really important to be said about what you're saying, which is that we have within us the ability, that inherent voice and dignity, and the ability to see, you know, to see things not as they are, but as they can be. And I think that's a gift that Christ gives us, right? So that we all can envision a better world for ourselves, and we need people to help us. And I'd be a liar if I said that, you know, all of this came without the help of anything else. But there's a difference. You know, John Perkins talks about the importance, and
John Perkins is
I'm sorry.
as you know, tell them who John Perkins is.
Yeah, well, Dr. Perkins is just sort of a legend of the civil rights movement, loves Jesus and has connected Jesus to the streets and to the pain, and grew up the son of a sharecropper, and he's been a great teacher of ours.
Not to interrupt, but continue.
No, thank you. Yeah, but you know, he speaks about the importance of coming into a community, and you know, automatically our assumption, even if you're someone like me who had the privilege of education, because I have privilege even though I came from a poor community, and what would it be like to not believe that we would go in and be able to save and fix, but if we simply sat at the feet of the people in that community and listened to them and heard from them, and then decided and allowed them, and this is I think this is the model that Jesus uses, right? Jesus teaches us, we hear from him, you know, the way, and then he sends us forth. And I think that's what we have to do. The poor, you have to allow the poor to, you have to sit, you listen to them, you hear from them, and then you allow them to send you forth. Shane, we need your voice for this. Speak for us on this. Or you, Dr. Campolo, we need your voice on this. Can you speak for us on this? But allowing them to lead and to direct us, which requires a surrendering and a humbling of our power and the privilege, which is so countercultural and so contrary to how we're taught, you know, to live in this country. And yet I think it's such a powerful way to interact with those around us and to see their power and not just their poverty.
You've talked on other occasions that I've heard you about your father, about the priest in the Franciscan church you grew up in, in the Bronx. Could you tell us about
Mike
all
Tyson.
Good old Father Mike Tyson. He's still in my life today. And I came up in a church where my priests and my pastors were always a part of our lives, you know. So they were there when I was in youth group as a teenager, and, you know, brought me home from youth group because I lived in a bad neighborhood and my parents wouldn't let me go. And they took, you know, they baptized my kids and married me and my husband, you know, and just a consistent, continuous part of our lives, which is what it's about. It's about that consistent presence and relationship building. That's what it is to be a shepherd. Yeah. And so that's what Father Mike was to us. And, you know, also someone who less by his words, you know, he actually gave me this plaque of Francis's words: preach the gospel always, if necessary, use words, because they believe deeply, Father Mike believed deeply in what what you did, and that really, really spoke
Your best
volumes.
sermon is your life.
Absolutely.
Jesus said that.
Absolutely.
Make people see your good works and glorify your Father
Yeah.
who is in heaven.
And speaking of my father is another one, you know, and Daddy, by the world's accounts, and this is why we have to be so careful by, you know, what we listen to and what accounts and what standards of power that we sort of look up to. Because by the world's account, my dad has a third-grade education. He came to this country. He slept on trains. He had an addiction to alcohol. He suffered greatly, and ultimately, you know, ended up on disability after many years of, you know, cleaning, of doing maintenance within a building. And yet the lessons that my father taught me about power and about dignity, about, you know, not judging, you know, always taught like there, but for the, you know, today it's him and tomorrow it may be you, Alexie. I think teach us, because we inherently judge because it's other people, and particularly the poor. We want to believe that people are in the circumstances that they're in because of what they've done, bad decisions that they've made, and that may all be true at some level, but in the end, love trumps all of that.
Yes.
And what we're called to do trumps all of that.
Yes. And at Eastern, we have this graduate program that trains people to go to third world countries and start small businesses and cottage industries that indigenous people can own and run themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And I always tell our students, you know you have succeeded if when something works and a community is changed, that the people in the community will say, we did it ourselves. We
Yes.
did it ourselves.
Yes.
Because that's what Jesus wants. Jesus wants people to be lifted up.
Yeah.
And those who have no power to have power.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about doing what you're doing, the verse that came to my mind is about Jesus himself. It says, though he was rich,
Yes.
for our sakes became poor,
Yeah.
that we through his poverty might become rich, rich in a spiritual sense. And we need more of those brothers and sisters who are willing to give up the wealth and the power and identify with the people with whom they live.
Yeah.
So as you're traveling around, you know, there's a lot of folks that are getting inspired. They're listening to the show right now and asking questions about what does this mean for me as a 15-year-old kid in suburban Illinois or whatever. You know, what do you find are some good places to start? I mean, sometimes it's easier to love like the invisible children of Uganda than it is the people right next to us. You know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really, really important, is to start right where you are and to believe where you're planted. One of the things I had to come to grips with was that, you know, my being born in the poorest congressional district in the United States was not some accident of fate, you know, that I had, and some puzzle that I had to sort of work myself out of at some point in my life, but that there was purpose there. And so believing in starting where you are, where has God planted? You know, what's there right in front of me, right? What's right in front of my face? You know, you're right. I think, you know, we romanticize poverty and we romanticize going to Uganda or, you know, or some other country and helping the poor. And not that those efforts are not desperately needed, but we will do that sometimes at the expense of going across the street, across the railroad track in our own communities and dealing with the people right in our face, because they are not the lovable poor. They're the ones in this country that we're afraid of, frankly. And it's very, you know, it's hard to see Jesus in them. But this is where God is calling us, you know, to those simple steps. And, you know, I love, and I think it's ironic that we wind up in the same places, because it's true, Shane. You know, we come from very different worlds, and yet we wind up in the same place. And what that says is God can bring us, you know, God calls us uniquely to the particular places in the particular ways. And what our responsibility is to simply take our place. You know, I love, it sounds silly, but I have kids watching The Lion King, right? And so what does Mufasa say to Simba? You know, take your place, you know, and this is what, to a young person in the inner city, you know, who feels powerless, who's been told, you know, you're worthless, you're powerless, to believe that you are called with purpose and with power, and that you have a mission, and that there's something for you to complete. For Shane, there's a mission. For me, there's a mission. For you, there's a mission. And until it's done, you know, it won't be brought to completion, as Paul says. And so to believe that gives us great strength and power, especially to a young person in the inner city who can't see beyond tomorrow.
It's a great line that Mother Teresa had that we both love, which is, for some people she would say, come to Calcutta, and to other people she would say, Calcuttas are everywhere if you only have eyes to see, so find your Calcutta. Not everybody needs to go to the Bronx. Not everybody needs to come to North
actually
Philly.
know of a woman who wrote to Mother Teresa and said, can I come and work with you? Her husband had left her. She was 45 years old. She had money. And Mother Teresa wrote back a one-line note, handwritten, you know, no typewriter, handwritten note. Dear Florence, find your own Calcutta. Love, Mother Teresa. And you know, the rich kid living in the affluent suburb of Philadelphia, Bryn Mawr, where I live, he doesn't have to go to the Bronx. There are kids in his high school who are oppressed. That gay kid that is ridiculed, that child that's being bullied, to stand up for those who have no voice, to defend the defenseless. There's a ministry and a ministry for every person,
Absolutely.
no matter where you are. We don't want to discourage people from going where there is need, but we have to tell you, you can't find a place where there isn't need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, and folks, you know, when you partnering with the poor means that you believe in their leadership and their expertise, but that you also go out of your comfortable places and you speak about things that are not the things, you know, so folks would not expect a upper middle class, white, you know, church-going young person necessarily to march with my young people against, you know, some of the strictest drug laws in this country that keep young people behind bars in New York State, the Rockefeller drug laws, or around issues of immigration reform or any of those things. But think of the power if you could, you know, if you would have that witness, if on television you not only saw the usual suspects, you know, but that you saw people, young people who grew up very differently, partnering with the poor and supporting them on these issues. And this is, you know, so there's a role for everyone, and it's not necessarily what we've done.
We got just a minute left, and I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time, which is, so you talk about growing up Catholic. Are you still Catholic?
I'm still Catholic.
Because I kind of find myself a little bit of a spiritual mutt. Like I'm an evangelical. I love my Methodist background, but I've grown to appreciate so much of the Catholic history. How do you work that out now? Are you at Catholic Mass on Sunday morning?
I go to Catholic Mass some Sunday mornings. I won't say I go every Sunday morning. Sometimes I have a great Pentecostal pastor that I go to, and my husband loves him, which I think is hysterical.
Pentecostal
My
Catholic,
husband is the best Irish Catholic, but you've got to see him at a Pentecostal service by Reverend Ray Rivera, the Sanctuary in the South Bronx. Awesome. Yeah, so I've learned, you know, that the whole being fed, entertained, well-fed factor, you know, sometimes it's more up to me and less up to what's happening up there, you know? And sometimes it's more about being in the presence of the presence.
Well, again, you stir our hearts, you motivate us, you bring tears to my eyes, and I love your authenticity. God bless you.
Thank you.
And may God continue to use you and the other young people in the Bronx who are working for a better world in the name of Jesus.
Amen. Amazing young people.
Amen.
There you go. You know, Karl Barth was once asked by a group of students, do you believe that people can be saved even if they're in other religions? Do you believe that other religions can provide a way of salvation? Karl Barth said, no religion can provide a way of salvation, not even the Christian religion. The only way to salvation is through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. What a good statement.
Great.
What a good statement. And we heard evidence of that. There are, I'm sure some listeners are saying, a Roman Catholic, born again, Pentecostal. What is this all about?
She's an anomaly.
Yeah, what is this going on? And St. Francis of Assisi. How has St. Francis impacted your life?
Oh, Francis, what I love about it is there's this innocence of just reading the gospel and going, what if he really meant it?
Yeah.
And literally banking the
Lived
rest.
out the red letters.
Yeah, I mean, banked the rest of his life on the fact that he meant it, and had the naivety or innocence to risk everything for that.
What Alexie was saying about meeting Christ in the poor, that was Francis. You know that story about him all dressed up in armor, going to war, and he's riding on his horse, and there's this beggar on the road. Do you know that story?
Yeah.
And he gets off the horse, and he goes over and gives the beggar some money. Gets back on the horse, the beggar's still standing in his way.
Yeah.
He comes down and takes off his cloak and puts it around the beggar because it's a cold day. Beggar still refuses to move. Finally, he comes down and puts his arm around the beggar and kisses him on his leprosy-rotted lips. Gets back on the horse, looks down, and the road is empty. And he realizes this was no ordinary beggar. This was Jesus presenting himself to me. Jesus always presents himself to us through people who are poor in their need.
It's been said the only true atheist is the person who still cannot see God's image in the poorest of this earth.
Yes.
And Mother Teresa used to say, if we look closely in the poor, we will see Jesus in his most distressing disguises.
Yes.
Because as Matthew 25 says so well, when we do it to the least of these, we do it unto Christ.
I heard her say, same thing, whenever I look into the eyes of a man dying of AIDS, I have this eerie sensation that Jesus is staring back at me. That kind of commitment, that kind of involvement with people who are in need, it changes everything.
I mean, what would the world look like if we anticipated looking into every person we meet and seeing the image of God there?
Yeah.
Especially maybe the people it's hard to like, you know, or the people who we're taught to shun.
You know, when we talk about the South Bronx, it's one thing. But for a while, you worked at the great Willow Creek Community Church in Barrington, Illinois, that famous big church, Willow Creek. And you found that among those poor people there were poor people there, but poor in another sense, weren't they?
Yeah, well, I met some of the most sincere people I've ever met at Willow Creek, and some that are close friends to me to this day, and leadership there. But one of the things that struck me that Alexie really brought home today was this idea that the great tragedy in the church is not that rich folks don't care about poor folks, but that rich folks don't know poor folks. Because we've lived in a culture that's taught us to separate ourselves from suffering, to move away from the neighborhoods where there's high crime or there's people who don't look like us. But as Alexie said so well, like the very essence of Jesus' incarnation is God moves into the neighborhood, in a neighborhood where they said nothing good could come.
I'm walking down the street in Philadelphia, and there's this homeless man, dirty, filthy, beard, not like you, but I thought, he's going to get me, he's going to get me. He's yelling and screaming. He's holding up a cup of McDonald's coffee. And when I finally gave him some money and hugged him, I realized I had Jesus in my arms. And it changed everything about my attitudes. Well, it's about time to wrap this thing up and say goodbye, but we'll be having you on the show a lot because you're going to be one of the co-hosts in the show on a regular basis. So
be on the lookout for Jesus in his many disguises.
And remember, redletterchristian.org, scroll down to Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice and learn about Alexie's ministries.
Incredible work they're doing.
Incredible. That's it.